Good morning, good morning, good morning. Hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to Adobe Live. Let me know if you guys can hear me okay. Everything's sounding good. All right, guys, welcome to episode 2 of Building an Online Presence. I'm your host today, Tyler Babin, and we are going to what are we going to do today? We're going to be talking about building your name and your brand and altogether your online community in the digital age. So if you were here last week, we went really in-depth chatting on both how to define your brand pillars and what you kind of want to say to the world before you start posting all of this stuff out onto the internet. And so we're going to do a quick recap on what we went over last week. I want to talk a little bit on sort of some efficiencies in developing sort of online content. So we're going to be breaking down how I'm going to make some micro content for a recent episode of the podcast that I produced with my friend Nick. And then I'm going to review some of your work. So if at any point over the next half hour you guys want me to take a look at your Instagram, your YouTube, anything of that nature, and give some live feedback in the moment, drop it in the chat at behance.net/live, and I will take a look at it on this episode. So I don't have a ton of time. I don't want to waste any time this morning. Let me know where you guys are watching from, but I'm going to go ahead and dive into the computer and give a really quick recap on what we went over last week. So this deck might look familiar. This is sort of my general thought process on developing online branding. And before we dive into anything, I'm going to give a very, very lightning round of everything we chatted on last week. So developing your brand, first and foremost, understanding the things you are interested in, the things you want to talk to the world about, and making sure that you have a really good understanding of that. If you guys want access to this deck, let me know. Feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram or email me or whatever it may be, and I will send you a copy of it so you can keep. Things that I'm interested in are fashion, photography, travel, music, technology, things like that. And so all of the work I create, I want to wrap around those brand pillars as well as my kind of brand terms. So aspirational, relatable, and transparency are things that all matter to me. We talked about developing content pillars. And so today we're going to specifically be talking about Tuesday Morning Coffee, my podcast. And I'm going to explain a little bit of how I go about creating all of the assets that go along with the podcast, the platforms that matter to us. So today we're going to be designing an image for Instagram, but also a 60-second rough cut of some video that I shot while this podcast was being recorded. We talked about the 3 C's of developing an online presence, content being number 1, experimenting with content, developing a visual style that works for you. We talked about community, and this is like where we're going to go really in depth, is being able to spark real conversations. And then finally, consistency, making sure that you're setting up a schedule that works for you, that you can stick to, and keeps your audience both entertained and engaged with what you're doing, but also you never want to over-index too much and put out too much content to a point where people become overwhelmed with where to start. And then finally, last week, we chatted about content distribution, and this is all about getting actual eyeballs on your work. And so I broke down how I would take an episode of my series 24 Hours With and break this down into close to, I think we did 30 to 35 pieces of content that we can take from one ultimate project. So again, I think this is really great for setting up just a good foundation, making sure you understand your goals and aspirations in developing an online community and an online presence before you dive into the computer and immediately start creating all these assets and all this work. It's important to know where that's all going to live. But we're going to jump into Premiere, and I want to talk about this quick Instagram clip that I want to throw together to promote a new podcast that I just released with my friend Nick Ivey. So Nick is an artist and illustrator based a little outside of Boston. We got connected through Instagram recently through a mutual friend. And he ended up coming down to New York City. He created a custom pair of shoes for me, which was really cool. And I was able to document that whole process. And then once those shoes were done, we ended up recording a podcast, hung out for the day, did all kinds of stuff like that. But I did take all these clips that I shot in about 60 frames per second. I dumped them into a timeline. All I've done at this point is set in and out points on the clips, and I've pretty much stabilized everything. Also, this morning I grabbed a new song. I only listened to the first few seconds of it, so hopefully it'll work good for this edit. I dropped it in with a couple sound effects, and I'm going to let you guys kind of watch how I develop both an Instagram clip as well as some assets for Twitter and other things like that that are all going to drive traffic back over to the podcast with Nick. Glad to see some people in here. David, thanks for sending in your Instagram. I'll take a look at that in just a minute. Richard, how's it going? Jason, how's it going? Thank you guys for joining. So I'm going to let some of this footage play through. Keep in mind, this is uncolor corrected, uncolor graded, completely raw Canon C-Log. I dropped the song in. I've done nothing to match beats or mark in and out points for the song specifically. So this is kind of, we're both going to be kind of watching it for the first time and seeing if something was able to kind of come together. I'm going to throw on some headphones and let's take a look. Okay, cool. So I really hadn't listened to much of the song, and I definitely hadn't put it in the edit yet. But funny enough, it almost lines up perfectly as is. We just need to make a few adjustments. So I'm going to go back into my timeline for just a moment. And what I'm going to do is re-listen to the song. I'm going to play it back through, but what I'm going to do is set some markers. And I'm going to do that just by pressing M on my keyboard, and you'll see what happens if we look up here on the timeline. If we press M, press M, we get a little marker that pops up right here. And what I do is I use this to set my moments where I hear either a kick drum or a snare, something like that, that I want the footage to cut to. Anytime I'm creating social content, I want it to be really, really snappy and fairly fast paced. So I'm going to listen back through the song. I'm going to create some markers of where I think good moments to have the cuts happen are, and then we'll readjust a few clips. And as I was re-listening to it, the intro of the song is a little weird. I'm actually going to clear out all of these markers. Oh, well, we don't even have to really do that. I'm going to go, the thing that sounds more interesting to me is whenever the real sort of like beat kicks in, and I want the entire edit to have that tempo. So I'm going to come right to the end, and I'm actually going to drag this song up. I'll drag all the clips over here. Let's delete this so it's at the top of our thing. Let's re-listen to it now without this long sort of drawn out intro. I want it to be like sort of hitting immediately. Yeah, this is way better. So now we can go through, we can make our markers and be able to get this. All I'm going to do is switch and actually put the markers directly on the song. So I'll expand this audio track and you guys can see where these little markers have been added down on the song. And all I'm going to do is really quickly just adjust some clips so that they fit on those markers. A lot of these are a little too short, so we're going to see if this helps the edit flow a little bit better. Now I had stabilized some of these clips already, so you'll see as I'm dragging the duration in and out, Premiere is just telling me that I need to reanalyze. All this is that there's new frames that haven't been adjusted for the stabilization. Remember, all this is shot completely handheld, so I don't use gimbals or anything like that. So I do really make sure that I'm putting a lot of energy into stabilizing my footage in post. So all we're gonna have to do is drag some of these clips around to fit the beat a little bit more. And I saw a question from David. Do I have any idea of the shots I want to get before I'm filming? Or is it just kind of like shoot from the hip? So as I'm going to go through and restabilize some of this footage and talk about this idea. So I historically never really planned out anything. I was very much shoot from the hip. That being said, I've put a lot of energy recently into developing some sort of system for shot lists and things like that. I recently started using an application called Notion. That's how I'm kind of managing, honestly, my entire life between that and my calendar. And I always make some sort of shot list, even if it's very, very loose. It doesn't have to be an in-depth shot list. Just having an idea of like, okay, for this, in particular, I knew that I needed like a wide shot showing Nick's environment, but I also wanted to make sure that I was going, for really, really close up detail shots of the pins as he was like painting on the shoes. So let's see, I'm gonna render this footage in and out just so it'll play through smoother. So all we've done now is readjust the clips to match the actual hits of the beat, which I think should make this kind of a lot snappier and a lot more eye-catching whenever someone sees it on the gram. Cool. So this sounds really good. I like the beat hits. For the time being, now this is only like 15 seconds. So this would actually be a really good Instagram story. And all we're going to do, I'm going to push everything aside and just focus on this 15-second increment. We're going to drag a couple quick sound effects. This is great. Now we just need to get some cool color grading. All I'm going to do is grab an adjustment layer. I want to make some global changes. We'll go over to my color tab. And we're going to do an input LUT. And so what I'm going to apply right now is a Rec 709. And a Rec 709 LUT is basically getting the footage back to looking fairly normal. What that means is all this footage was shot in Canon C-Logs. That's why it's very flat and kind of gray and washed out. But I do this so I'm able to capture as much dynamic range as possible. And what I want to do is get the footage looking back to normal. So we're going to go browse. And then in my creative assets folder, I have a whole bunch of LUTs that are saved in here. There's one particular LUT I want to add on. And you can see quickly this added, if we expand here, the footage looks back to normal again. So there's a lot more contrast. It's not quite so flat. Normally I would go a little bit more in depth here, but I've done a number of other Adobe Lives where I've gone really in depth on color grading. So for now, we're just going to leave it as is. And I would export a version of this edit for Twitter. Twitter has a really good format of doing widescreen, and so this is a really valuable edit to have. But like I said, I do want this to ultimately live on Instagram stories. And so we're always thinking about how to cross-pollinate content. We can use a really great feature built into this year's edition of Premiere, which is auto reframe. So all we're going to do is go back to my sequence in my project bin right here. And this is great. If you guys haven't seen this, I'm using the main sequence that this is edited in. We're going to right click and we're going to select auto reframe sequence. I want to change this over to a vertical 9:16, which is formatted for Instagram stories. We're going to go create, and then Premiere is going to auto generate a vertical file for me. Let's let this render out for just a second, and then we will see what it looks like. Let's give it another second to analyze. Yeah, David, auto reframe is, if you guys have followed me for a while, I used to work as a creative director for Gary Vee, and most of my job, it felt like, was always just generating hundreds of different iterations of videos in different formats, and I would spend hours and hours of my life on that. And now being able to do it with one click and create every format I really need in just a matter of seconds has been a total game changer. Looks like this is done. Let's let it play through, see how it looks. Awesome. This looks really good. So auto reframe uses Adobe Sensei AI's technology to basically make a decision as to what the subject of the video is. And so in this instance, it did a killer job of making sure it kept the shoes and everything in frame that I wanted. But if you are experimenting with this, we can go over to our effect controls, and let's take this clip as an example. If we wanted to reposition this, all we have to do is eliminate the keyframes that Premiere has auto-generated for us, and you still have all the flexibility to adjust. So if for some weird reason I wanted Nick's mouth to be the focus here, I can still make that change, and it's not going to make any adjustments for the rest of the sequence. It'll just change that clip. So what I would do in this situation is go over and export all of these versions. Normally I would create a few different auto reframe sequences at a 4x5 for my in-feed Instagram, as well as any other social platforms you would like to share on. So this is a really quick tip for a fast way to generate multiple iterations, making sure that you're not only just putting all your eggs in one basket of Instagram or Twitter or TikTok or whatever your platforms of choice are, making sure that you're generating content specific for each platform and putting it out as such. A question I see from Paco in the chat also was asking about the lighting of this shoot. So it was pretty much very, very basic. All I did was take one softbox, and it was directly over the top of Nick while he was painting. There was no extra lights. Other than that, it was a completely dark room. I tried to keep it really, really simple and just one light so that all the focus was on the shoes. We're going to save this, and we're going to take a look at some work. I think I saw some links pop up in the chat. This is going to be a weird inception right here. So Pablo, let's take a look at your Instagram. All right, cool. So Pablo is an illustrator, traveler from Brazil. First thing I love to see is that you're using your bio really, really well. You're really, illustrating who you are, what you do, and then immediately you have a great call to action pushing to what looks like your book. I love seeing highlights. The only thing, maybe to make these a little bit more interesting and cohesive, if you are an illustrator, it would be really cool to see some illustrated highlight covers. So maybe you draw a version of Paris and Chile and Berlin and all these places. You could do an illustration to really quickly show off examples of your work. Even before people get into the feed, that will kind of introduce them to who you are and what you do. Stoked to see you've got some Instagram stories up, and I'm going to scroll through a little bit and take a peek at some work. Beautiful stuff, man. First and foremost, it looks very, very good. It looks like you're a photographer too. Some really great images, and I want to look up here. Let's take a look. Really cool work. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is the community aspect and really building out followers and things like that. I would love to see a little bit more context to the photos. Saying train station is cool, but I think what would be awesome is to hear a little bit background of what makes this train station special. Where were you going? Where were you coming from? And you can always ask a good question in this caption of, what's the last trip you went on? Where'd you go? Did you take a train? You can always sort of build out a little bit of conversation. Then people drop comments in, and then you can ultimately dive in on top of those and go even deeper in those comments and really sort of get good conversations flowing. But ultimately, really good work. Looks like you're doing a great job. I would just love to see a little bit more of a community base and conversations that are happening around your work. Let's dive back in here to the chat. I think I saw one more link. Here we go. Streamception, that's right. Cool, so we've got Untapped Hip Hop here. We work with artists inspired by hip hop from all over the world. We use our platform to promote talented artists. Tap into your potential. Cool, it looks like you've got a magazine. Sick. Love this. Awesome. So again, really great work with the bio, setting it up, and getting a good understanding of who you are right out of the gate. Would love to see a little bit more on the highlights front. If it is a magazine, maybe formatting a couple like issues to fit fully onto your highlights could be really interesting. Always delivering content directly to where people are is a great thing. So as much as I'm sure it makes a lot of sense to siphon them out and get them on your actual magazine website, I think it would be really great to provide a little bit more, maybe in the highlights section of stories, stuff like that. We're going to scroll down. So I love immediately, there's clearly a very like personal aspect to this feed. It's not overly commercialized or anything like that. But I would say you could push that a little bit. You could make this a little bit more of a business page around the Untapped Hip Hop magazine. So again, similar to highlights, putting a little bit more information as to what's going on in the magazine world. I would like also to see maybe a little bit more of like your personal thoughts. Let's see, I'm going to read this description. This is great. I think this is really good. I like seeing carousels. Carousels, I think, are probably the most undervalued thing in being used on Instagram at the moment. But I think you could actually push this a little bit further, similar to the last account I looked at, building out a little bit more of like personal stories. It looks like you're doing a lot of events and things like that and documenting up-and-coming artists, which is awesome, and I'm a big fan of that. But giving a little bit more context. I think it would be really cool if maybe there was a 1-minute little micro interview that you did on all these carousels to give a little bit more context on who these artists are, where they're from. But I love the human documentation that I'm seeing. It looks just very honest. Yeah, all I would say is I would love to see a little bit more about this magazine landing directly on the page. But ultimately, really, really great work, man. If you have any other questions that you want me to go a little bit more in depth, feel free to shoot me a message and we can chat about it. But really good. Also, looks like a good use of hashtags and things like that. Let's just go and make it both, pushing the personal level and giving a little bit more real insight into these people, into these artists' lives and things like that. Awesome. So this was a very, very quick one today, guys. If anyone else wants me to take a hyper fast look at their Instagram, drop it into the chat really, really quick as we're kind of wrapping things up. I want to take one more quick peek at this deck and talk about kind of the nitty gritty, and this is where I really want to emphasize the 3 C's. The 2 Instagrams that I just reviewed, I think, are doing 2 things really amazing. They've got the content on lock. There's always room for growth there, and it looks like they're being very consistent and posting on a regular basis. The only thing to make sure we're remembering is community, and community is the biggest secret to growth. I think on any social platform, there's this sort of context of this idea of 1,000 true fans, right? And like really building out those 1,000 people that really, really want to work with you and do more things with you. And so if you can get to know the people and make them fans for life, you're ultimately going to be way ahead of the game in the overall growth, and making sure that not only are you putting out the content and you're putting it out consistently, but you're yourself taking time to actually go back and fully invest in helping other people's community grow. So for the Untapped Hip Hop, for instance, you should be on every single hip hop page that you can find, commenting and giving your overall thoughts. And that doesn't mean spamming like, hey, come look at me, but offering real value to the conversation that's going on. And in turn, once people start seeing that, they're ultimately going to come back and look at your stuff and start following you for the right reasons. And then once you pair that with the content and the consistency, that is someone who is going to become a fan for life, and ultimately is going to be the sort of foundation of your journey as a content creator and being able to develop a good following. All right, guys, so this has been a really quick rundown on building your online presence. I hope you guys took some value. We talked about branding. We talked about video editing. I got to review some Instagrams and give some feedback. This was a lot of fun. If you guys have more questions, please don't hesitate. Shoot me a DM, shoot me an email. I'll throw my Instagram up right after I jump off here, and we can chat further. Ultimately, hope you guys have a great weekend, a great rest of the year. I can't believe 2019 is almost over. Totally mind-blowing, but I hope you guys have a good one, and I will see you soon. Peace.